Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this committee meeting to order. As permitted by the Governor's Disaster Declaration of November 10th, 2022, the determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for the committee to meet in person. So to ensure a transparent and an open meeting as possible, CMAP will post the meeting materials approximately 1 week in advance and will provide a recording of this meeting linked on the CMAP website. And as we have done, we will take all the votes by a roll call. Staff, I believe, has some additional virtual meeting logistical announcements before we take the roll.
Sure, thanks, Aaron, and welcome everyone. Just a couple of reminders on Zoom protocol, although I think we're all well familiar with it by this point. We ask that people please mute themselves when they are not speaking, but for any members, when we're doing roll call or taking a vote, please unmute yourself and say your name before voting or saying that you're present, just so we're able to record that in the minutes. I will also note that we have a meeting chat and staff will be monitoring the chat. To the extent we can, we encourage people to just let us know in the chat that they have something they'd like to say verbally so that we can give you a chance to say that and have it recorded as part of the official meeting record and as part of the minutes. So if you do have anything you want to say, please just let us know in the chat. And if you have links to share and things like that, feel free to put those in the chat as well.
Thanks so much, Brian. And now, if we could please call the roll.
All right, Chair Aaron Dernbaugh.
Present.
Vice Chair Deborah Stone.
Present.
Jack Chan.
Present.
Naomi Davis.
Present.
Martha Dooley.
Here.
Elena Grossman.
Present.
Cynthia Canner.
Present.
Marcella Bondi-Keenan.
Present.
Elizabeth Coach. Thomas Maylard. Edith Macra.
Present.
Raid Mansour.
Present.
Paul May.
Here.
Mary Nickel.
Present.
Vanessa Ruiz. Matthew Santagata.
Present.
Jen Walling. And Chris Young.
Here.
Great, we have a quorum.
Thanks so much. Moving on to the next agenda item, there have been requests for some agenda changes. So staff has requested that we move item 4.01, CMAP strategic direction, to after item 4.05, CMAP's water resources work plan. The two items are directly related, and reordering them will facilitate a more well-informed discussion. Any questions or comments about the proposed agenda change? If not, I just need a motion and a second to move that agenda item.
Motion. Second.
When you give your motion and your second, could you please say your name so I have it for the record? Thanks.
Marcella Bondi-Keenan, motion.
Thanks, Marcella.
Debbie Stone.
And Deb Stone seconded. Thank you very much. Are there any questions on the motion? If none, staff, could you please call the roll?
Sure. Chair Aaron Dernbaugh.
Approve.
Vice Chair Deborah Stone.
Approve.
Jack Chan.
Approve.
Naomi Davis.
Yes.
Martha Dooley.
Approve.
Elena Grossman.
Approve.
Cynthia Canner.
Approve.
Marcella Bondi-Keenan. Elizabeth Coach. Thomas Maylard. Edith Macra.
Approve.
Raid Mansour.
Approve.
Paul May.
Yes.
Mary
Yeah.
Nickel.
Approve.
Vanessa Ruiz.
Approve.
Matthew Santagata.
Approve.
Jen Walling. Chris Young.
Approve.
Great, the motion carries.
Thank you very much. We will now move on to announcements. For announcements, we'd love to welcome two new members to the Climate Committee, Matthew Santagata and Chris Young. Matthew Santagata is the Regional Planning Manager at Open Lands and works with the Land Preservation Team to integrate equitable human-scale development with broader natural systems and crafts plans which increase climate resiliency, promote accessible green space, and foster environmental justice. And Matthew, if you could just take a moment to introduce yourself briefly to the committee.
Thanks, Aaron. Hi, everyone. My name is Matthew Santagata. I'm the Regional Planning Manager with Open Lands. I work on planning and policy across Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin. Most of my work is centered around climate change resiliency, green infrastructure, GIS analysis, stormwater modeling, and environmental design. So I'm very much looking forward to being a part of the committee and working with all of you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Welcome. And then Chris Young. Chris Young is the Director of the Office of Resource Conservation at the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. He leads a team of 200 dedicated to wildlife, forestry, fisheries, resource, and natural heritage protection. Chris, would you like to take a moment?
Thanks, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this committee. I look forward to learning from all of you. In addition to my regular duties, I'm also the climate action implementation lead for the agency. We've been working for the past 2 or 3 years on some climate action plan within the agency, taking greenhouse gas inventories, working on the feasibility studies for solar development and a variety of other issues. And I've really enjoyed sort of learning a whole new business or whole new industry in the last few years. It's one of those things that when I came out of school, I didn't imagine I would be part of, and now I'm right in the middle of it. And it's really a rewarding part of the agency to be working with. And we're working across the entire agency. So we have people on our climate implementation team, from site technicians at our sites to engineers to pretty much all across our agency. So thank you for inviting me to be part of this.
Welcome, Chris, and welcome, Matthew. Look forward to meeting you in person at a future committee meeting. We are now going to turn it over for the executive director's announcements. Aaron Alleman couldn't be with us today, so I will turn it over to Amy McEwen and Bill Barnes, who will be presenting those comments and announcements to the committee.
Good morning, committee members. My name is Amy McEwen. I'm the Deputy Executive Director here at CMAP. Happy to be with you today. On your agenda, you'll see 2 attachments that are under Aaron's report, and feel free to follow along or review them later for your reference. I would also appreciate welcoming Bill Barnes to this committee. He is serving as our interim deputy for the Regional Planning and Implementation Team, and he's going to kick off our report.
Thanks, Amy, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for allowing me to stand in Aaron's shoes. I'll be updating you on 2 items in the attached agenda: the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, excuse me, and a related notice of proposed rulemaking. And Amy will then brief you on our continued mobility recovery work and CMAP's Regional Excellence Award nominations. Beginning with the region's greenhouse gas emissions inventory, it was launched in September of this year and includes local summaries for all 7 counties, 284 municipalities, and 77 Chicago community areas. CMAP's newly updated inventory shows that between 2010 and 2019, overall greenhouse gas emissions in northeastern Illinois decreased by 9% during this 10-year period. While this represents progress, in 2019. We were really pleased with the attention the inventory has received. As noted in the summary attached to the agenda, after just a month, more than 1,100 people visited the webpage, and we're already seeing partners using their data. For example, Kane County presented the inventory report and their local summary at their board meeting, and the RTA wrote a blog about the data and what it means for them. Please let us know if you're interested in CMAP presenting to your agency or helping you to share this information to your stakeholders. We recognize that all 284 of our communities are unique, and that is why for the first time we provided this level of local data. CMAP is committed to arming our partners with comprehensive data and analysis to allow them to take action and improve our region's environment, ecosystems, and our health and well-being. Local governments, sustainability committees, agency partners, and others are encouraged to use this data to develop local climate action plans. Also attached on your agenda is a letter from CMAP to the Deputy Administrator of Federal Highway Administration with comments on USDOT's notice of proposed rulemaking, which requires states and MPOs to set greenhouse gas emissions targets for roadway travel on the national highway system. On behalf of our region, CMAP supports this new rule and intends to set emission reduction targets on the NHS as part of a larger process of setting region-wide transportation sector targets. Your support, expertise, and work on this committee will help us continue to advance our regional goal of reducing greenhouse gas levels by 80% below 1990 levels by 2015, create a more resilient transportation network, and protect our region's water resources. In fact, today, we'll be discussing this committee's work plan for next year and the work planned around water resources. We'll also provide an update on CMAP's strategic direction, which serves as a framework to focus and strengthen efforts to advance the goals of ON to 2050 within the next 3 to 5 years. The creation of this committee earlier this year, along with the new structure of the regional economy and transportation committees, aligns with the strategic direction's focus areas. And now to Amy to discuss mobility recovery.
All right, many of you have heard a little bit about our mobility recovery efforts. Shortly after the pandemic kind of came to visit us all here, we started realizing quickly that there were going to be shifts and changes in our transportation system, and that we really needed to partner with various agencies across the region and begin to research what those shifts would be, how long-standing they are, look into the data, and do some analysis. This set into motion 2 years where we sought to develop vision mobility strategies for Northeastern Illinois post-pandemic and to reimagine how our transportation network can better serve our residents. As you'll hear and see, the recommendations in this report align with our region's ON to 2050 goals and provide a strong foundation for the next phase, which is a plan for action for regional transit, or the PART initiative. That's our acronym for it, because we're CMAP. We love to have a few short ways to say things. So PART will include research as well as collection of existing already completed data and analysis that has been done by CMAP as well as various other partner agencies. It'll be targeted research, facilitated regional conversations, and ultimately a report for the state legislature in January of 2024 on the state of transit, along with specific recommendations on things our region needs to do to have a sustainable system. Our steering committee is kicking off this work in January, this next phase of work, and you will be hearing much more about this in the coming months as the Plan for Action for Regional Transit, or PART initiative, proceeds. I'm really excited also to tell you about and remind you of our Regional Excellence Awards. While filling out award nominations isn't always the most exciting thing we can do, we really encourage you to think about it because it's a way to spotlight great work that is happening all across this region that supports and furthers the objectives of ON to 2050. So that is the main purpose of our Regional Excellence Awards. One, we want to give people a pat on the back and a thumbs up to say thank you for your great work. But most importantly, again, we want to highlight and spotlight that work in hopes that it will encourage other organizations to kind of join in on the fun and put together their own good projects that further ON to 2050. There's a focus on equity, on strengthening the resilience of our communities, and how we're going to help our region be economically competitive moving forward in this new economy. The award categories, the Regional Resilience Award, specifically recognizes a plan, project, or initiative that helps communities prepare for and recover from economic and environmental challenges. That's the one I think that most closely aligns with the subject matter of this group, but there's lots of great awards in there, and I encourage you to take a look at them and think about who your partners are and or your own work that might be nominated. Nominations close on December 16th. Again, share it with your friends or other agencies. It's a great opportunity to really recognize good work from across the region. Thank you, and that's all I have, but both Bill and I are happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Amy and Bill. Are there any questions from the committee members? Okay. Oh,
Quick question. Can you place the link to the nomination page into the chat?
will do, Bill or Bob. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll move on to our next few agenda items. First one being an approval of the minutes. A copy of the minutes from September 27th, 2022 were included in the meeting packet. Were there any requested changes or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, could I get a motion and a second? And
This is Martha Dooley, a motion to approve.
thank you, Martha. And a second?
Cynthia Canner, second.
Thank you, Cynthia. So that was a motion from Martha Dooley and a second from Cynthia Canner. Are there any questions to approve the minutes? If not, staff, could you just please call the roll?
Sure. Chair Aaron Dernbaugh,
Approve.
Vice Chair Deborah Stone,
Aye.
Jack Chan,
Approve.
Naomi Davis, Martha Dooley,
Approve.
Elena Grossman,
Approve.
Cynthia Canner,
Aye.
Marcella Bondi Keenan, Elizabeth Coach,
Approve.
Thomas Maillard, Edith Macra,
Approve.
Rid Mansour,
Approve.
Paul May,
Aye.
Mary Nickel,
Approve.
Vanessa Ruiz,
Approve. Approve.
Matthew Santagata,
Approve.
Jen Walling, and Chris Young.
Approve.
Great, the minutes are approved.
Thank you very much. As we discussed earlier, we were going to move the next agenda item a little later on, and we'll move to item 4.02, which is the 2023 Climate Committee meeting schedule. So we will maintain holding these meetings on the fourth Tuesday of the month. And so that will be in January, April, July, and October. So if there's no questions on that, I need a motion and a second to approve the 2023 Climate Committee meeting schedule.
Martha Dooley, motion to approve the schedule.
Thank you, Martha.
Edith Macra. Go ahead.
Marcella Bondi Keenan, second.
Thank you, Marcella. So that was Martha Dooley providing the motion and Marcella providing the second. Any questions on those dates? If not, oh, go ahead, Martha.
I do have a question. Are you planning to hold those virtual again? Do you know next year, or will they be only in person? It's a matter of requesting funding to attend if they're going to be in person.
Staff.
Yes, that's a great question. I think that we certainly hope that we will have in-person meetings at some point in 2023. I think for the time being, as long as the governor continues to extend the emergency declaration that allows us to hold the meetings virtually, we will continue to do so. That's a month-by-month decision, and we just don't know if or when that will change. But we recognize the convenience and the ease of attendance for people when we continue to hold them online. Unfortunately, we don't have a firm answer on that. Once the emergency declaration is lifted, our interpretation of the Open Meetings Act is that we will be required to hold them in person. So we will do our best to give everyone plenty of advance notice if that changes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Hearing none, if we could please call the roll.
All right, Chair Aaron Dernbaugh.
Approve.
Vice Chair Deborah Stone,
Aye.
Jack Chan,
Approve.
Naomi Davis, Martha Dooley,
Approve.
Elena Grossman,
Approve.
Cynthia Canner,
Aye.
Marcella Bondi Keenan,
Approve.
Elizabeth Coach,
Approve.
Thomas Malar, Edith Macra,
Approve.
Raid Mansour,
Approve.
Paul May,
Aye.
Mary Nickel,
Approve.
Vanessa Ruiz,
Approve.
Matthew Santagata,
Approve.
Jen Walling, and Chris Young.
Approve.
The motion carries.
Great, thank you. And thanks everyone for your patience getting through some of the more parliamentary aspects of our meeting. Our next item is going to be discussion of potential topics that we could include into this committee's work plan for 2023. So this year, as a reminder, we discussed first the strategic direction for CMAP. We reviewed CMAP's climate mitigation work, the resilience work, and later in this meeting, we'll be talking about the work on water resources in the region. But staff has asked that we as a committee have a discussion about pressing issues that we should bring forth and discuss as part of this committee's work and how CMAP can serve as a resource. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian and Jamie to facilitate this discussion. But yeah, I look forward to a fruitful conversation about setting our agenda for next year.
I will take this one to start. Thank you, Aaron. So we've had, as Aaron, Chair Durno has said, we have discussed a lot of our climate work through the last, this past year. So hopefully you have a good idea of the portfolio of work that CMAP is doing. That said, we did want to pick the committee's brain to see if there are topics or areas of focus that are really relevant to this committee that we should be focusing our attention on for 2023. We do not have our work plan set in stone yet. So we wanted to throw out a couple potential topic areas, as you'll see in this slide. One would be, really focusing on transportation land use that has come up previously. We have the GHG data. How can we better support communities with that? Another alternative is to go back through our climate work program in those themes that we have already discussed thus far and kind of pick out some more specific areas within those themes that we can take a further look at and see how CMAP can further their role in those areas. So really just want to open it up for a discussion and learn more about the work that our members are doing that CMAP can help assist with and provide more feedback for. So not everyone jump on at once here. Okay, Cynthia.
I would be interested in hearing more about issues surrounding habitat loss and that contributing to the mitigation of climate change. So if anybody wants to jump in, if that's something that has been on the radar or will be possible in the future in discussing that in, municipalities, even, residential and more education about preserving and protecting the habitat we have left here in Illinois, especially in the northern region, obviously. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. We know that that as sort of one component of sort of a broader discussion on land use is something we've heard from committee members throughout the year. So thank you for that.
This is Paul May, and I just wanted to, I know there's a separate agenda item for a water work plan, but just want to note that there remains a vacuum as far as strategic planning and regionalization and guidance in that area. So I'd encourage that to be continue to be part of the platform.
Thank you, Paul. We'll go with Member Mansour next.
Hi, thank you. We're working with IDOT and EPA to create vegetative barriers around schools where schools are near highways and roadways. So I didn't know if CMAP is interested in discussing or getting involved, especially with the climate discussions, in partnering or providing more research around the vegetative barriers and roadways. Thanks.
Perfect. Marcella.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I'm also interested in habitat loss, but more specifically in the 30 by 30 context. So I'd be curious to get a sense of the baseline for what biodiversity looks like, especially if we could drill down a little bit for the local level. And then also supporting Justice 40 and finding out how investments are being spread across different populations.
Thank you, Marcella. Edith.
Thank you for recognizing me. I'm really interested in learning how some of the tools that CMAP has put out, particularly the greenhouse gas snapshots, how they can be used by municipalities and how there might be technical assistance to support communities in doing their own climate action plans, to stepping that down and empowering municipalities to do their own planning. And then one other suggestion would, it never gets old, and I know we talk about it a lot, or it's being talked about a lot, is how the federal funding and the state funding through CEJA particularly could be leveraged for climate action.
No. Mary Nickel.
Yeah, more of a question. I haven't dug into the greenhouse gas inventory data yet, but I'm curious if that gives us any sense if there are, problematic trends in the region that would inform some of the areas that we need to focus on as a committee.
Great question. I don't want to put Jared Patton on the spot, but I believe he is here and he can probably answer any questions related to that as a staff member that worked on that. But if he cannot, we can certainly get back to you with that. All right.
Yeah, and I don't know it to the depth that Jared does, but I will say, we do have trend data for the region in there, including some breakdown by sectors, and we have trend data for counties. This was the first year that we did the municipal emissions inventories, so we don't have data on the trends in individual municipalities and Chicago community areas. But we do, I think, have enough information to identify some trends, and hopefully that will be a useful input to the kind of local planning Edith was discussing, as well as some of the kind of regional level planning that CMAP will be taking on itself.
Yeah, excellent question. And just to let everyone know, we're going to try to get through the members first, and then we will open it up to the public for comments. Aaron, I believe you had your hand up next.
Yeah, just a reflection on the last bullet there, which is the structure for the meetings and the agenda items. I've appreciated that because it helps structure the meetings and also make sure some of those things don't get lost. But if there was a way potentially to lift up the mitigation aspect, potentially as a standing element on each meeting, it seems to be one that we revisit, whether it's related to land use, whether it's related to transportation planning, whether it's related to the inventory work and the what Edith mentioned about the sort of application or technical assistance related to the inventory, the greenhouse gas inventory work and sort of data support to municipalities and others around the region. If I like having the structure of having something dedicated to water, having something dedicated to resilience, but even as this meeting's demonstrating, the other topics come in no matter what. So maybe just thinking about that so we can have the meetings organized in a meaningful manner. Thanks.
Elizabeth Coach.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to actually follow up on the Justice 40 topic that was mentioned, because I'm leading all of our Justice 40 programs and initiatives for any of our solutions and proposals moving forward. However, what I do realize that there's a lot of misinformation or lack of information or awareness of what Justice 40 really is, and how does that trickle down? So Justice 40 really applies to any federal investments. And so it would be interesting to see actually, or to really have a discussion on what that means at the state level and even at the local level. So when we're thinking about the CMAP region as well. So how does that impact any federal investments that are, or dollars that are being utilized? And so I'm happy to discuss it more at another time, but Justice 40 is something that should be a topic that we discuss or keep, I guess, on the forefront of any of our discussions too.
Yes, thank you. Vice Chair Stone.
I'd like to emphasize Erin's point about mitigation and also lift up that first bullet point that you have on the slide. This is the CMAP Climate Committee, and there are certain innate roles that CMAP has and certain levers, I guess, that CMAP has to influence what's going on in the region. And I would really like to see the work of this committee integrated as much as possible in influencing CMAP's core work on the transportation and system in particular in the region. I think that's an opportunity we should not miss.
Thank you. Any other comments from the committee? Marcella?
Yeah, just following up on Deb, I really appreciate that CMAP's been doing ADA training or has it plans, and I think that that's going to be really key for our transit system. I know we're talking about that a little bit later, but I think an accessible and reliable and affordable transit system is a goal that I do think is super relevant to the transportation aspect.
Absolutely. Any other comments from Climate Committee members at this time? Some wonderful, wonderful input here that we will need to come through.
Yeah,
okay,
and if I might ask a question, and maybe this partly gets to Chair Dernbaugh's comment about, about possibly shaking up the one topic assigned to each meeting as an organizing principle. I'd be curious whether members have a preference for continuing that kind of organization, and more generally across all these topics that you've raised today. Does anyone have any thoughts on sort of how they would like to discuss these? Does the format of kind of presenting, we've wanted to use this year to kind of set the table as far as what CMAP has been working on and what strategic direction CMAP has been taking. But are there any other kind of types of discussions or presentations or agenda items that people feel would be fruitful for the committee?
Yes, Marcella.
So I would appreciate maybe having more workshop oriented or perhaps expert presentations with discussion, facilitated discussion afterwards. I think that could be a nice change of pace for some of these.
Any other comments as it relates to possible themes and how we present our work from committee?
And one other way I would ask the question is, in past CMAP committee meetings under the old structure, we sometimes had presentations by committee members, and I was curious whether people would be interested in sharing some of their work in a more formal way than just the kind of member announcements that we've had time for this year. Would people be interested in potentially sharing some of their work?
So I'm not sure if that would add a lot. I think everyone's doing great work. Don't get me wrong, but I think probably I'll do our best to follow and stay informed of what folks are doing and use those. I sort of imagine there might be other ways that CMAP could facilitate that information sharing that wouldn't sort of get into the committee meeting agenda structure. So through your newsletters, through other things. So anyway, but to your comment, Brian, or your question about what I think there's important decisions that CMAP is making in the policy committee at the board level. And I don't know that we feel necessarily, well, I speak for myself, that in the climate committee and in the structure that I see how the discussions and dialogues that we're having are either informing those CMAP decisions, or we're being informed of the significant CMAP decisions, sort of to Deb's point about where the levers of CMAP. And so I think thinking through that, I know we have a time challenge. We have 4 meetings. They're at a certain date, and sometimes, timely or important aspects aren't, are difficult to get onto an agenda in a meaningful way without kind of tipping over the apple cart. So just thinking through that a little bit, are there aspects related to timing? I know we get presentations on what the sort of state and federal policy agenda is for CMAP, but are there other ways related to CMAP decisions that are coming up that this committee could deliberate or provide feedback?
Thank you, Chair Dernbaugh. Any other comments from committee members, and then we will open it up to some public comment as well. Okay, hearing none. Mr. Israel, you've had your hand up patiently.
Well, thank you for hearing from me, and I appreciate the work that you guys are doing. I'm just recently getting involved in it myself from the committee level. Just as by way of a brief introduction, I'm a 40-year plus civil engineer. I've built many of the town's infrastructure around here, or designed much of the town's infrastructure around here. I'm familiar with these things, and have and am a trustee at the Village of Northbrook, where I've been working on climate issues for quite some time. I would like to, I guess, endorse or riff on the materials that Edith is bringing forward, because having gone through the CMAP material for a number of years, I find that going at the issue from a local level has really made a consequential difference in how we do things. The Village of Northbrook has adopted a year and a half ago a climate action plan, and has increased, or reduced, I should say, our carbon footprint by roughly 10%, measurable amounts and quantifiable output over the past year by following the goals on that climate action plan. We've put together 180 plus action items that we've been moving forward with. And I've really come to the conclusion that in support of the CMAP goals, it's best to implement from a local aspect, where we can focus on a municipal level on the most relevant 100 goals and start getting them implemented. As you've called forth the issue about getting together 4 times a year, limits the progress. It would be nice to be able to foster climate action plans in each and every municipality out there in support of your goals. And I think that there are methods for doing that that are quantifiable and can make a real difference in going forward. So that's my part.
Thank you. Martha Dooley.
Yeah, and sorry I didn't comment before. I do like the structure of the meetings, the way they are now, where you focus on one topic per meeting. I do think that that's great because I can put my mindset in a certain place when I'm reviewing the information. But because we are meeting 4 times a year, I want us to also be open to adding other things onto the agenda because they happen to be, it's a good time for us to bring them up, or their current events or something like that. So I don't want to restrict the agenda just because we're going to stick to one topic.
Certainly. And then we will move to Mr. David Powell, and we will wrap up our discussion.
Hey, thank you, everybody. My name is David Poe. I represent the Active Transportation Alliance and our over 20,000 members. With the approval of CMAP's regional plan update recently, the agency rubber stamped hundreds of miles of new roadway miles across the region, which obviously runs counter to the goals of this committee. As we learned through the greenhouse gas reports from CMAP, transportation is the only sector that's seen an increase in emissions over the last few years in our region. And while we appreciate the expertise and presence of this committee, our members are concerned that not enough is being done to stop the construction of dangerous, polluting roadways across our region. So I ask that everyone in this committee and everyone that works at CMAP who's on this call to use your influence and position to push CMAP, IDOT, CDOT, Cook County, and all of our regional DOTs and government agencies to stop expanding roadways and to start building a more sustainable world that young people like me will inherit. And we are going to have to clean up the messes of these massive roadway expansions. So I do ask that you use your position to push as hard as you can to stop these roadway expansions and to really make an impact on our region. So thank you for your time, and I appreciate all of your hard work.
Thank you, Mr. Poe, and thank you to all the committee members. We will go through all of this commentary and really start working on our work plan for 2023 to be something that is meaningful and really does have an impact on our region. I will turn it back to Chair Dernbaugh at this point.
Thanks so much, Jamie and Brian, for facilitating that conversation. Our next item, Daniel Camo will provide an update on the agency's mobility recovery project and the development of a transit system report, which was referred to in Amy's comments earlier.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. So thank you. As the chair just said, I'm Daniel Como. I am a senior transportation policy analyst here at CMAP, and I am the project manager of both of the efforts that we'll be talking about with you today. This is a series of work that CMAP has been doing and will be doing as we continue to grapple with the impacts of the pandemic on the region's transportation system and the broader impacts that can have on all the things that we care about, including the region's climate and sustainability goals. So if you can go to the next slide. The first project that I will be talking about is something that we call mobility recovery, which is a project that is just about to wrap up. It's something that we've been doing since about summer of 2020, when we realized that the pandemic was not a blip and that we were not all going to suddenly return to the way things were just a few weeks after the lockdown. So we have been doing a series of analyses and convenings and work to really understand what are the kinds of changes that the COVID-19 pandemic has led to here in the region, and how do we need to grapple with that and plan for that as a regional planning agency, given the many different ways that the pandemic has upended all of our lives over the last 2 years. So if you can go to the next slide. I think that just went backwards, actually. Yes, thank you. So this project, which again, we've talked about a number of different public bodies and events over the last couple of years, was really to grapple with what we call the medium-term transportation challenges, and thinking about how the region can still make progress toward the goals laid out in ONCH 2050 that we still think are the right goals for our region, but in a world that looks a little bit different now than it did in the spring of 2020 or the winter of 2020. And so to do that, We have done some policy benchmarking. We've looked at policies throughout the world and in our peer regions here in the United States. We've done a lot of engagement with organizations and stakeholders throughout the region. That has involved a steering committee of regional representatives from the public and private and civic sectors, as well as engagement with community groups through the Transportation Equity Network to get a different perspective on the impacts that they're seeing from the pandemic. We've done a variety of research activities. We've looked at what we can already see in terms of COVID-related changes, in terms of where people are working, how often they are working remotely, where they're living, how often they're traveling and using what modes. And then we did some modeling, and we took our research and our sort of best guesses of where things might land to evaluate different versions of the future and looking at what that means for the region's transportation system, but also what it means for the things that we care about that come out of the transportation system, like greenhouse gas emissions, like congestion metrics, like safety. We looked at all of these different impacts to try to understand if more people are working from home more often, what does that mean for travel, for emissions, for all the things that we care about. With that, we also did some work to model the financial implications. We'll talk about that a bit more. And based on all of this work, we've identified some potential responses and recommendations that the region can pursue. This is going to be published in a report that is coming out very shortly in the next couple of weeks. And we'll be talking more about what that includes in the next couple of slides. If you can go to the next slide, please. Just to give a highlight of a few of the things that we've found over the course of this work. One, which I'm sure is no surprise to any of you, is that we do expect remote work to stabilize at a higher level after the pandemic than it was before, but we wanted to put some numbers to that. And so on this slide, we've highlighted in dark blue the parts of the region where a third of employees or more might be working remotely on an average weekday. And so this is a significant increase from pre-COVID, when you might have seen something like 6 to 8% of regional employees working remotely. After COVID, we think a new stable level might be something up to around a quarter of all regional employees. And so that's a huge number of work commute trips that are taken off of the transportation system every day. Leads to people taking different trips in different places, fewer trips to and from places like the Loop, but also fewer trips to and from employment centers in places like Central DuPage County, Northern Cook County, Southern Lake County. These are really significant employment centers that might just have fewer people taking transit, driving, biking, any of those modes to and from them every day. But they will now be taking more trips around their home. And so that leads to different challenges, different strains on the system. I do also want to highlight, though, that this is a lot of people. Moving from less than 10% to a quarter of the population working remotely in an average weekday is a huge shift, but it's still not a majority of travelers. Most regional employees, most regional residents work in industries that don't allow telework. They work in industries like healthcare and manufacturing and education, where it is much less straightforward for employees to telework, or it's just not possible. And so even while we have some industries where this is going to be very common, to the norm, maybe for even a majority of employees, for many regional employees, this has not been a part of their COVID experience, and it will not be a part of their experience going forward. And so if you go to the next slide, we are also thinking about how we plan for the individuals who are going to continue to travel. We've highlighted here some work from early in the pandemic when we were talking about essential workers. And something that CMAP analysis showed is that for those individuals who were traveling during the pandemic, they were disproportionately coming from places in the region that were more heavily concentrated in terms of people of color, communities with lower average household incomes. And we expect that these same trends are going to play out in terms of access to telework. Even before COVID, there were disparities in who had access and who did not have access to remote work accessible jobs. And we expect that that's going to continue to be part of the dynamic. And so as we're planning for a transportation system, we have to make sure that it's one that continues to support all of the trips that people make, whether they're traveling for work or for all of the other reasons that people use our transportation system. So If you go to the next slide, we've taken that work and as I said, a bunch of other research and policy benchmarking and engagement with stakeholders to come up with a set of recommendations. I'm just going to briefly highlight them here. We're going to have as I said, a more detailed report that's going to be coming out shortly, and we'll make sure to make that link available to committee members and to the public. It'll be in our newsletter and those sorts of things. But it's going to highlight a series of recommendations. One of them is a set around investing in a stronger and more financially secure transit system. And so that's thinking about improvements to the system, things like a more integrated and affordable fare system, speeding up our buses and making sure that they are faster, more reliable, enable more frequency. But we're also going to be talking in great detail about the need to invest more resources in our transit system. You may have already heard from our partners at the RTA and from us that we expect a really significant funding gap in our regional transit system after federal aid is fully exhausted, which we expect will happen sometime in 2025. And at that point, the system is going to face a budget gap of more than $700 million just to operate at pre-pandemic levels. And that is a huge shortfall, and if we don't address it, it would lead to really what we view as unacceptable and damaging impacts to our regional transit network. And so we've identified a series of recommendations both to improve the system and to address the funding gap that we know that we're going to need to fill. The second set of recommendations is really to highlight the non-transit types of modes that we have also seen such great interest in during the pandemic, things like biking and walking, but also real concerns as we've seen an increase in what we view as unsafe driving behaviors, leading to real dramatic and worrying growth in pedestrian, bicyclist, and vehicle fatalities on our roadway system. And so we've highlighted a series of recommendations there, both to invest in the infrastructure that makes these modes realistic and attractive choices, as well as the kinds of development patterns that make them feasible. And then finally, we have a series of recommendations thinking about the impacts of e-commerce and other freight activity. I'm sure that many of you have experienced the growth in deliveries and things like that over the course of the pandemic. And so we are thinking now about how we can use things like shifting toward an electrified or zero emissions freight system as a way of mitigating some of those challenges, as well as making sure that the jobs that are in this sector remain accessible to all residents of the region and not just those who have access to a personal car. So again, we'll have much more detail on all of this coming up soon, but that's a brief tour of the recommendations. What we're going to talk about, what I'm going to talk about now is how we're taking the left side of this, the transit-related recommendations, and pulling them forward into what we have identified as our next program of work related to this, which we're calling the Plan of Action for Regional Transit. And so this project is really coming out of a state requirement. So if you can flip to the next slide, you may be aware that this past year, the governor signed a piece of legislation, which is now Public Act 102-1028, which requires CMAP to develop a report of legislative recommendations on improvements to the transit system in response to these challenges that I was just walking through. And so we have to do this in consultation with the Regional Transportation Authority, and under the guidance of a steering committee, which we can talk about. But I would recommend, if you're interested, to Google Public Act 102-1028. The legislation is very short and sweet, but it has a lot packed in it. And it's going to be guiding the work that we do on this over the course of the next year. If you can go to the next slide, the legislation requires us to develop this report focusing on a number of topics. First and foremost, the long-term financial viability of the system, again, speaking to that large anticipated budget gap, but also making sure that we are doing that in a way that ensures the system is comprehensive, coordinated, safe, secure, clean, efficient, and that it supports and fosters efficient land use. So it hits a great variety of topics. We also are required to consider racial equity, climate change, economic development, and the highly complementary strategic planning efforts that the RTA is working on right now and will be publishing in draft form shortly. As we do this work, we are required to consider a number of different mechanisms. One of them is what is called the recovery ratio, and this is the statutory requirement that the region's transit system generate about 50% of its revenues through things like fares, as well as other system-generated revenues, although it's mostly fares. But we're also required to consider things like the RTA sales tax and how those funds are distributed, the governance of the region's transit system, the fare systems that riders use to take advantage of all of the different transit options. And then in case that wasn't enough, any other changes to statute, enabling legislation, policy rules, and funding. So we have quite a broad mandate in this report, but it is really focusing on how do we make sure that the system can continue to operate in the ways that we think are necessary after federal aid is fully exhausted in a few years. If you can go to the next slide. Thankfully, given the short timeline that we are working with, we are not starting from scratch. For one, we are building off of the work that we've been doing as an agency and as a region in our mobility recovery project. Excuse me. But we're also going to be building on other work that CMAP has done, like Onto 2050 and our work on transportation fees, fines, and fares, as well as the work done by our partners. So the RTA strategic planning efforts, the work that the service boards are doing right now to respond to the pandemic. And so we're going to be taking all of that as really critical input, because we need to get a lot of work done in very short order, and we don't have time to start over. We also don't need to, because a lot of this work has been done. And so we're going to be identifying what we think are gaps that we need to fill, and then areas where we can pull from really excellent work that's been done before. If you can go to the next slide. One thing that I want to highlight, just given quite how overlapping it is the RTA strategic planning process. That has been going on over the course of the last year. And as I mentioned, they're going to be putting out their draft plan for public comment very shortly. And so we have been engaging regularly with RTA staff, and they're going to be playing a part in ensuring that this program of recommendations is something that we think is workable and can really meet the challenges that we face as a region and as a regional transit network. If you go to the next slide, just to highlight in brief the timeline, we are now finalizing our scope and pre-work. We've presented about this work to our board, to the MPO policy committee, to you and to the other working committees of the board. And we are now preparing to launch the steering committee that the legislation requires us to set up to guide this work. It's going to have representation from community groups, from business groups, from civic groups, from environmental groups, and from labor organizations. And so those are all called out in the statute specifically. And so we plan to launch that in January, and then really have a sprint of work, because this report is due to the legislature by January 1st of 2024, but it needs to be approved by our board and MPO policy committee before being submitted to the legislature. And so we are targeting the last meeting of the year for the policy committee, which is October of 2023. Between now and then, we're going to be doing a variety of analysis, of engagement, of sort of thinking through what a portfolio of recommendations could and should be. We're going to be doing this both with CMAP staff and with some consultant support on some technical questions related to revenue development or service improvements. And so all of this work is going to be happening. We're going to be meeting with and presenting regularly to all of CMAP's public bodies as well. And so we're going to be coming back to you as well as the other working committees with updates to share information, to get your perspective on how things are developing, as well as presenting regularly to the board and the MPO policy committee. So you might be tired of hearing from us by the end of the year. And certainly if you watch any of our other public meetings, you will see lots of presentations about this work. We do think it is a really important set of tasks, because our goal is to ensure that the transit system that our region has really come to rely on can continue to operate into the future. If you can go to the next slide, what we wanted to do with you today as a group, just to start this discussion, before we really kick off the work in earnest, is to get your perspective, as members of this committee, on what you see as the value of the transit system to the work that this committee is considering. And so we have one question here. We have a few more that we can talk about, but I'd like to open it off just by asking, how you think a healthy and financially sustainable and viable transit system can support our region's response to climate change. Because something that we are trying to do through this work is to develop champions for our region's transit system and to really understand what messages are going to be most effective in communicating why it's so important for us to act, and why doing nothing is not an option. We see the system faces some really tremendous challenges, and we need to do something about it. And so we're trying to think about how we tell that story. And we do think that the climate impacts and the sustainability impacts of transit are a really critical aspect of that. But we'd welcome any of your thoughts or perspectives on what role you see transit playing in our regional response to climate change. And also, I know I just threw a wall of text or of content at you, and if you do have any questions about what I just shared, we'd be happy to talk about those too. Yes.
So thanks very much, Daniel, for that presentation on those two topics. I guess I would be interested. This maybe doesn't directly get at the question, the prompt you provided, but in the report that you're generating, how are the greenhouse gas impacts of those recommendations going to be quantified? Certainly, we know, having a robust transit system is important in this discussion, and also these sort of post-COVID impacts. How you quantify the greenhouse gas and other climate impacts of those changes, and then these recommendations. I think just how that will be quantified will be important to certain constituencies and hopefully to the legislature.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. We, in the mobility recovery side of things, we did do some greenhouse gas modeling as part of our broader transportation modeling. And so I expect that we will do a similar set of, at the very least, we will, whenever we run our travel models, we will, see what the transportation greenhouse gas impacts are. And so, we are expecting, and our modeling team is currently developing some initial runs to understand, if you change the system or degraded it in some ways, what would the impacts be? And we expect that it will show, significant increases in greenhouse gas emissions. So that is one area that we plan to use the modeling capabilities that CMAP has to quantify. We're open to other ideas on how to tell that story, but that's one area. We do think there will probably be a mix of things that are quantified and not, but certainly on the transportation system side of things, we do plan to develop those numbers and to use them as part of the messaging. Edith?
Yeah, thanks. So obviously the reducing vehicle miles traveled is a really important mitigation response. And I think that's where most of the benefits arise. But when we did the climate action plan for the region, one of the things that was really interesting to observe was the role of having transit and active transportation for resilience. And there's a couple of benefits there. There's redundancy, equity, access, and then sense of community when you have people that are using a shared transit system or connecting on active transportation routes, that there's more of a cohesion that's really hard to build in communities. So those are some of the benefits.
Thank you. And yes, the cohesion one is something we've been talking about a little bit. I think it's obviously not a directly climate and sustainability one, although you can make a connection to the ability to confront collective action problems. But certainly the idea of a resilient system and one that has options and redundancies is one that we also think is important to highlight. Any other thoughts or perspectives on this question? If not, we do have a few other discussion questions we'd welcome your input on, but want to leave the floor open for just a moment. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. So just to highlight some of the things that we've already been seeing, and these are again some initial messages. These are not region specific, but things that emerge from national discussions about the importance of transit. There's national metrics in terms of we see reductions of tens of millions of metric tons coming out of transit just from direct emissions reductions. Millions of gasoline, millions of gallons of gasoline that are not burned. In contrast, we know that the private vehicle is the largest contributor to many households' carbon footprints, and that transit makes it possible for people to reduce their car ownership, maybe not eliminate, in some cases eliminate, in some cases moving from a 2-car household to a 1-car household. And that is a really important way that households can also reduce their emissions. So we see transit, Edith, to your point, of providing these additional options and redundancies, but also allowing people to make different choices that might be more affordable and also more sustainable about their travel modes. If we can go to the next slide. We also know here in the region that there's been discussions about transit climate friendliness, and recently Dorval Carter from the CTA was sharing their statistics, which show that out of the transportation emissions within the city of Chicago, 80% of those are coming from cars, 1.5% of them are coming from buses, and so it really does demonstrate the significant role that transit can play, regardless of its fuel source, in shifting the emissions curve. And if you go to the next slide, just a couple of more discussion questions that we'd be curious for your perspective on. One is, again, thinking back to how we make the case to the public and other stakeholders. So we'd be curious if there's any other perspectives you would have there. And then the second question is, broadly and not even necessarily related to transit, which is we're emerging from this pandemic. I think we're all waiting for something to stabilize as a new normal, and it's not clear if we reached it or when we will ever reach that. But I'm curious for your perspective on what other environmental or climate or emissions related effects that you think we should be looking out for as we continue to emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic. There's certainly changes in transit use and changes in work from home are ones that we're thinking about, but we'd be curious if there are others, especially as we're thinking about developing recommendations to support the transit network as a part of the broader regional transportation ecosystem. And I see Martha has her hand up.
So this may be totally off the wall, this thought, but if transportation is reduced on the surface, transportation is reduced on the roadways, primarily like people not traveling back and forth and things, is there any sort of material source reduction in maintaining roadways or anything like that that would contribute to a better climate?
That is a good question. I think at this point, we have not, there was certainly a reduction in VMT at the beginning of the pandemic, but in large part, personal and commercial vehicle travel has resumed to basically pre-pandemic levels. It doesn't look exactly the same, and there are changes in when people are traveling, and so there's the morning peak has flattened a little bit, but in general, the VMT is getting back up to where it was, is my understanding of the latest numbers. I do think, in the long term, if we saw changes in VMT that could allow for different investments in roadway infrastructure, that could have some downstream impacts that we would want to consider. But at least at this point, while transit usage has not returned to pre-COVID levels, most other vehicle travel has. Excellent question, though. I think Marcella was next.
Yeah, Daniel, thanks for the presentation. Obviously transit is a key piece of the puzzle for, an electrified and decarbonized transportation sector. But I don't know that that's the best way to communicate the value of transit to the broader community. I mean, some people will respond to that and maybe be sort of climate guilted into taking the train instead of driving. But I think most people just need to and do recognize the value of transit as part of your daily life. I think that the issues for making the case with transit don't really have to do with lack of climate awareness, but the other very real challenges that CTA and RTA generally is facing around service. to riders, and that's why the levels haven't increased. On top of the fact that, you know, there's this perception that when you're in your car, you're in a COVID-free bubble, but on the train or bus, obviously we're not. So to me, yes, I think we all agree that transit is necessary, but I don't think that the communications campaign should hinge on that. It can just be one plank of it. On the second question, I would say the things that I'm seeing out in the Western burbs is single-use plastics just boomed during the pandemic. And that does have extreme impacts since they're literally made from fossil fuels. All of those sites are in global and national EJ communities. And, you know, I think that we take a more global approach to climate justice. I think plastic reduction becomes part of the puzzle too.
Thank you. And definitely we're trying to think about how we tell a comprehensive story. I agree that there are many reasons why the system is facing challenges today. And certainly, you know, we are hearing lots of the same concerns about reliability and you know, experience on the system. And so I think we're trying to think about how we tell a story that has multiple messages that might speak to different stakeholders. Certainly this, I don't think will be the only one, but we do, you know, think that it is important to highlight that without transit, we know that we can't achieve our regional greenhouse gas reduction goals. So that's, I think, where we would try to place that within the broader story. And point taken on the single-use plastics. I think that certainly relates also to the e-commerce kinds of discussions that we're having in our broader mobility recovery discussion. Cynthia?
Thanks. Two things real quick. First, is there a component of advocating for more electric vehicles in this discussion? And then also sort of the overriding need in energy reduction in the home, in our communities, a reduction and a focus on the reduction of energy use across the board would go a long way to mitigating the effects of climate change. Is that anywhere on the radar in incorporating that? Thanks.
So on vehicle electrification, and I will say within the context of transit, we're not talking too much in this project about personal vehicle electrification. I think certainly we're thinking about how transit vehicle electrification could be one strategy that also helps to bend the operating cost curve in the long term, given the potential for lower, as a co-benefit of electrifying the transit network. You know, something we're trying to think about in any of our recommendations is what are we doing in ways that can help to, you know, in the long term, make the system more financially sustainable. And if we can, you know, move toward electric vehicles in ways that, you know, might lower operating costs, that is a nice addition. So we're still figuring out the exact scope of system improvements, but that's where we've been talking about that side of things. In terms of sort of broader energy use, I think that generally is falling outside of the scope of this. Although I will say that something we're thinking about is, you know, the legislation requires us to think about fostering and supporting efficient land use. And there are many dimensions to efficient land use. But certainly we see, you know, different greenhouse gas emissions profiles for different land uses throughout the region. And so that is something that we might think about and think about what transit makes possible. But I think that would be more of a complementary point as opposed to the residential energy use might be more of a complementary point to that as opposed to a core focus. Martha?
But I also think energy efficiency should be looked at when you look at the transit agency's offices. Any sort of, for example, if you ride the L and all the stations are lit at night, you know, what sort of energy efficiencies can you achieve there that would reduce their costs overall?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to take a lot of things to solve this. So,
well, thanks so much, Daniel. I think we're going to stay on our agenda. I think we're going to move along here. If anyone has other feedback for Daniel related to these topics on transit, I'm sure Daniel would welcome taking those directly. So
Yes, definitely. And if you go to so we'll be presenting some things to various groups. Here is our email addresses. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me or anyone else on the project team, which is Laura Wilkinson, Amy Lee, Elizabeth Scott, and a bunch of others. But if you have any questions, please feel free to send it to this group and we will direct it accordingly. Thank you all so much for your input. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Daniel. And we'll look forward to additional work on these projects and those recommendations into next year. So our next item is a presentation on CMAP's water resource. And we're going to start with Nora. Hi, Nora Beck.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, it's nice to see you all again. It's been a while since I've come before the committee. As you all know, CMAP's approach to addressing climate change focuses on three different areas: reducing greenhouse gas emissions, enhancing climate resilience, and then sustainably managing our water resources. At our May meeting, you heard about our efforts to reduce emissions. September meeting, you heard about the climate resilience work. And so today, Holly Hudson and I are going to present our water resources work to the committee. I'm going to first give an introduction to the overall approach, and then Holly and I will briefly walk through our slate of projects, and we're hoping that you come away with a solid understanding of our portfolio and identify ways that we can work together on these issues. Next slide. So like all the agency's work, our water resources work is guided by the three principles of ONTO 2050. Resilience, of course, is straightforward. We want to prepare for the extreme weather of today and tomorrow and recognize the impact that these forces can play on our water resources. Inclusive growth is an overarching goal of our climate work. Access to clean, reliable water, whether it's through recreation or for essential drinking water services, is not equitably distributed throughout the region. Some communities have suffered from a history of marginalization, being overburdened by pollution, and receiving a lack of investment in infrastructure. So advancing equity in our climate work remains crucial to address these historic and ongoing inequities. And then finally, prioritize investment, right? Wise stewardship of public revenues as it relates to water resource investment is critical to maximizing our regional benefits. Next slide. So all of our water resources work reaches across the main functions of the agency, right? Through our local land use and transportation planning activities, we're seeking to incorporate those water supply and quality considerations in local decision-making. We support sustainable management by analyzing and sharing data related to water demand or water quality and providing that guidance to shape policy decisions around investments. And because water doesn't follow political jurisdictions, we are facilitating coordination across governments and agencies to understand these challenges, identify opportunities, and seek out solutions. And finally, we do include water resource impacts as scoring criteria in our regionally significant project evaluation, looking to reduce impacts on existing habitat, minimize new impervious cover, and avoid spin-off development in areas with water supply constraints. So here are several of our water resource projects that I wanted to highlight today. I'm first going to cover the first three that are really focused on water supply planning, and then I'm going to turn it over to Holly to step through our water quality planning work. This is a good time to mention that all of our water resource work couldn't happen without the support of the Illinois Department of Natural Resources and the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. So these are critical partners in our portfolio. All right, so this is going to be a quick and dirty summary to provide some context on water supply planning. So forgive me if I'm missing some critical steps here, but everyone knows how Chicago reversed the Chicago River. This allowed us to protect our drinking water source by redirecting sewage from entering Lake Michigan. And instead, we're sending that water out of the Great Lakes Basin down the Mississippi River to the Gulf. Transferring that water from one basin to another set the stage for some tense relationships between Illinois and the other Great Lakes states. And beginning in the 1930s, the US Supreme Court got involved as an arbiter on this issue. And through a series of cases, they've upheld that diversion, but they've set limits on the amount of water that we can take from the lake to 3,200 cubic feet per second per year. In 1980, Illinois sought an amendment to that 1967 Supreme Court consent decree to give us the discretion on how to allocate that water within the state. And it also makes some other changes of how that water budget is calculated. Illinois was motivated to make this change because they were thinking to extend water to DuPage County. So historical groundwater withdrawals had diminished the supply of water going to DuPage communities, and they decided they needed water from Lake Michigan to serve this growing population. This map that was created by the Illinois State Water Survey really shows the years of switch from groundwater to Lake Michigan and sort of in a decadal pattern. And it's really showing the story of groundwater depletion or other groundwater issues in our region. In 1996, the state passed the Level of Lake Michigan Act. This gave IDNR the authority to run the Lake Michigan allocation program, established a permit system, a set of criteria in which to evaluate new applications. One important goal of that program is to reduce the withdrawals on the deep aquifer. And the act outlines conservation and efficiency practices that all permit holders should follow. And that includes limiting water loss, metering of all new construction, limitations to outdoor lawn watering, and a variety of other mechanisms. In the next slide, talk a little bit more about the history. So we've got in 2008, the Great Lakes Compact is passed. You know, this is an agreement of the Great Lakes states with the U.S. Congress, and its goal is to protect and restore our critical Great Lakes assets and remove causes of present and future controversies. The compact aims to prevent the adverse impacts that withdrawals pose from the lakes. And how that could impact the basin's watersheds and ecosystems. And under the compact, no increased or new diversions are allowed, with the notable exception of Illinois. And specifically, the compact states that Illinois is prohibited from using any term of the compact to seek new or increased withdrawals. But we are subject to the conservation requirements of the compact. Meanwhile, the state's Water Use Act, oh, sorry, still on that slide, thanks. The state's Water Use Act in 1983 governed all other water use in the state. And this law did a number of things. It changed our doctrine from one of absolute rule of capture to one of reasonable use. It also required high capacity wells and intakes, as well as withdrawals for public water supply systems to report their water use annually to the Illinois Water Inventory Program. And it gave county soil and water conservation districts the authority to receive notice on incoming substantial users of water and allow them to recommend restrictions in case of emergency. However, the Chicago region had been previously exempt from this act, so it wasn't until 2009 that these features were included for our region. In 2006, the governor issued an executive order requiring the development of a regional water supply and demand plan for the Chicago region. CMAP worked on this and formed an advisory committee and subsequently released Water 2050. Water 2050 seeks to ensure that the region's relatively finite water supplies will be available for years to come, and it's intended to inform decisions about water supply and demand. It provided the region with its first rigorous water demand forecast, which was compared against estimates of water supply to highlight where supply may not be able to meet projected demand. The recommendations in this plan really focus on water demand management strategies or conservation and efficiency, and they remain relevant today. The last segment of this really brief history is in 2015, the Illinois State Water Survey, or ISWS, released a study based on a large-scale analysis of the deep sandstone aquifer, and they were projecting large areas of desaturation in portions of Will and Kendall County. This diagram on the slide provides like a cutaway view of the groundwater aquifers looking from the southwest of the region towards the northeast, towards the lake. And areas in red in the St. Peter aquifer signify desaturation where water could no longer be available as a reliable drinking water source. This analysis was based on those projected demands that were done for Water 2050, and so IDNR recognized that having an updated set of water demands would allow the state to provide communities with more information about their available supply. So given CMAP's role in Water 2050 and the fact that we maintain a regularly updated population employment forecast, IDNR requested our assistance, and we released an updated demand forecast in 2018 in conjunction with ONTI 2050. These are long-range planning level forecasts. They look out to the year 2050, and they're based on the relationship of water use and the demand factors within each individual municipality. And so it's really a ground-up built demand forecast. A special note here that we couldn't have done this work without our partnership with Margaret Schneemann at the Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant. So at this time, I'd like to present some of the results of that forecast. I do want you to keep in mind that these numbers do not reflect CMAP's most recent population and employment forecast that was just released a few months ago. And that more recent socioeconomic forecast is projecting slower growth in the region by 2050. So with that word of caution, let's step through these just for the larger scale information. Our 2018 socioeconomic forecast projected that the region would add 2.3 million residents and 900,000 new jobs by 2050, and those are shown in gray and dark gray on this chart. Despite the demands of that growing population and economy, total water demand is projected to stay relatively stable, as shown in blue on this chart. By 2050, total water withdrawals are estimated to be around 1,100 million gallons of water per day, an increase of less than 1%. And the demand forecast stays relatively stable because we are assuming our existing water conservation and efficiency trends will continue. And so this chart shows how the water use per person and per employee is estimated to continue to decrease. The next slide, despite increasing water conservation and efficiency, the long-term sustainability of the region's water supply really depends on the location of demand and the source of water. By 2050, CMAP anticipates an additional 1.5 million residents and 500,000 new jobs in communities that currently depend on groundwater. And those are shown in shades of orange and brown on this map of water sources by municipality. And consequently, water demand is projected to substantially increase in these areas. And yet this is precisely where we're seeing some unsustainable use of the deep sandstone aquifers, as well as development-related pollution of our shallow aquifers. The next slide shows how that projected change in demand by source could happen from 2011 to 2050. So you'll see that demand in the shallow groundwater dependent communities is anticipated to increase 33% and the sandstone aquifer to increase by 35%. You can also see that we're projecting a 9% decline in Lake Michigan withdrawals by the year 2050. Communities using Lake Michigan water are expected to see population growth, but the conservation and efficiency trends really exceed that new demand that we're anticipating. This chart is a little out of date, I should say. It doesn't yet reflect decisions in Western Will County and Kendall County to seek Lake Michigan water, so we'll be updating it in the future. Before I move on to the next project, I did want to show an example of how our 2018 regional water demand forecast has been guiding water supply decisions. The Illinois State Water Survey has updated their regional groundwater flow model using our forecasted water demands. They have also been working closely with individual communities in Western Will County and Kendall County to get more data on their current water use, as well as more detailed utility scale forecasts and plans for the area. Their analysis showed that communities in this area could see substantial declines in well performance by 2030, and that really inspired a number of communities to start looking at alternative sources. This chart is just one example of a scenario that was done to inform that process. It poses the question of what if the city of Joliet just got off the sandstone aquifers in 2030, as the city had decided at the time. And while water levels would improve once Joliet is off the aquifer, it's clear that problems could persist out to the year 2050 in this area. So as a result of this work, Joliet has successfully applied and received a permit for Lake Michigan water, and several other communities in the area are seeking allocations. So I wanted to take a slight shift and talk about another body of work that's really inspired by a desire to better understand Illinois' groundwater governance system. So before I mentioned how the Water Use Act of 1983 placed reporting requirements on high capacity wells and started a process where the county soil and water conservation district should weigh in on substantial new withdrawals as they're proposed. However, the system isn't quite happening as outlined. And right now there's no proactive process in the state where the amount of water withdrawn from a given well is reviewed based on water quantity considerations before it is constructed. So everything is after the fact and largely through the court system. So given the desaturation of the sandstone aquifers, that's really been the result of collective withdrawals over the decades, as well as contamination due to land use practices that steadily are increasing water quality issues in our aquifers, we were motivated to get a better understanding of how our groundwater governance system currently operates and then start to identify opportunities for improvement. So the next slide just sort of details our process so far. We first reviewed groundwater governance concepts. As you all can imagine, groundwater is a classic common pool, decentralized resource. It has the characteristics that make it inherently complicated to effectively manage. Across the nation, we know that management is highly fragmented, with different agencies having different regulatory authority over different portions of water use sectors. The literature increasingly identifies that management at the site scale no longer works, that it's really a system level approach is needed. And we also know that half of the US states anticipate changes in groundwater regulation in the next 5 years. Through that exploration, we came across a growing body of work that's attempting to identify principles or a framework of good groundwater governance. And we use those frameworks to evaluate Illinois' existing groundwater system, as it provided us with a comprehensive way to sort of unpack that complex structure and identify where we could take further action to lead to better groundwater resource management. To do this, we selected work by Stephen Foster, and you can see this highly detailed table here. Foster's work uses a very broad definition of governance. So it's not just the legal and institutional, but also the technical, the cross-sector policy coordination, and the operational sections of a larger system. Once we had a basic evaluation completed, and that's summarized in a memo, we then explored how a sustainable groundwater governance system could be structured with an advisory committee, and that resulted in a process map, and that's shown on the next slide here. We worked with our advisory committee members to build this out. It's basically a planning and management tool that visually describes the inputs, actions, and outputs of a process. And we used Water 2050's overarching goal to guide this exercise. Committee members began to identify the existing and potential relationships between the different sections of a groundwater governance system. And so this diagram begins to highlight how groundwater science could be used in decision-making, or how land use planning decisions could play a role in water supply planning. One component of the process map that really got our advisory committee's interest peaked was the use of groundwater management action plans. And so we did a number of case studies focusing in on Minnesota, California, and Texas on how other states have structured these groundwater management plans. We're actually going to try to use that information that we learned in the next project. And that's a project that we're hoping to complete with support from IDNR to work with the Northwest Water Planning Alliance to develop a water supply sustainability plan. The next slide, yeah. So this, if you're not familiar, the Northwest Water Planning Alliance formed following the adoption of Water 2050. It's a collection of groundwater dependent communities, around 80 communities represented by intergovernmental agreements of 5 councils of government. The effort was really spearheaded by Aurora's late mayor, Tom Weisner, and his commitment to maintaining water supplies in the region. The NWPA provides a forum for elected officials, utility and resource managers, and others to learn the latest scientific research concerning the health of our water supplies. And through these conversations, NWPA members have developed tailored solutions and best practices. And so in the coming year, and the NWPA has been a leader in the region for calling for conservation and efficiency for a long time. And now with advancements in groundwater science, we are beginning to understand just how to quantify how much water needs to be reduced in this area. And so next slide here, the group is interested in developing a water supply sustainability plan, using information from the Illinois State Water Survey on sustainable yields, be able to outline strategies to reduce their reliance on groundwater aquifers, by estimating which strategies could be more effective, and how does that get them closer to that sustainability goal. So the planning process is designed to help NWPA members answer some very specific questions. Just how much less water do we need to use collectively? How far will specific conservation strategies get us? And what strategies are most effective? So that is a summary of our water supply planning work right now. And now I'm going to turn the mic over to Holly Hudson to talk through our water quality work.
Thanks, Nora. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. So our water quality management planning work goes back many, many years. I think the next slide starts again a little history. Back to 1948, to set the stage was the original Federal Water Pollution Control Act. But when things really started to you might get serious, were the sweeping amendments in 1972 to that Federal Water Pollution Control Act to become what we now know as the Clean Water Act. Then in 1975, the Illinois governor designated 3 regional planning areas as area-wide water quality management planning agencies. He deemed NIPSI at the time, Northeastern Illinois Planning Commission, along with Greater Egypt Regional Planning and Development Commission, and the Southwest Illinois Municipal Planning Commission, Metropolitan Planning Commission as those agencies. And then in 76, Illinois EPA was designated with that water quality management planning responsibility for the rest of the state. And then with some Clean Water amendments, Clean Water Act amendments in 1977, kind of put it in stone that IEPA, along with these 3 regional planning agencies, are designated the continuing planning agencies for water quality management planning, and so that gives us our authority as a regional agency in water quality management planning. A little more history onto the next slide. Then really when NIPSI worked, I guess I would call it quite an undertaking at the time, spending 4 years of technical investigations, including there were numerous detailed water quality studies and biological studies. There were more than 300 public meetings over these 4 years, developing the first area-wide water quality management plan for the 6-county Northeastern Illinois area at the time. There were basin plans, for I think 12 major 12 basin plans that represented a comprehensive strategy, combining our wastewater treatment facility plans and non-point source management programs. I think there was we introduced the concept of ongoing intergovernmental cooperation. There was a system of area-wide committees set up and a county-wide water quality committee recommended for each of the 6 counties. Those were endorsed as part of the plan. So I think it was really, really a great initiative at the time. After that time, there were some delays in federal and state approvals, and there were changes in federal funding for planning that created uncertainties as to our influence, the regional group's influence in state and federal decisions. But nonetheless, 120 local governments passed resolutions of support, and Lake and DuPage counties set up their initial water quality committees. So they were leading the region there. Then some Clean Water Act amendments in 1981 clarified some things, and agreements were reached between Illinois EPA and NIPSI at the time, and clarifying our role as the area-wide agency in water quality management. Then in 1982, Illinois EPA decided to consolidate those 3 area-wide plans in the state into one, state plan, really to streamline the review process of things and provide consistencies across the state. Certainly makes sense. And our, regional area-wide plans served as a supplemental information base and certainly ongoing expression of local support and consensus. So I might call it the base plan document. The Illinois Water Quality Management Plan was last revised fully in 1992, but since then, as ongoing, it's frequently amended and updated, incorporating various documents by reference, including approved facilities plans, wastewater treatment facilities plans, approved watershed-based plans, various total maximum daily load plans. I could go on and on. You know, even the state's non-point source management program is that changes a bit from year to year, groundwater protection program, and as well as the non-NPDES permits. So the next slide, I think, just gives a little, so again, the Illinois Water Quality Management Plan, just to summarize that. So again, through that, you'll find the policy and recommendations for protecting water quality, controlling point and non-point source pollution, again, provides that unifying framework across the state for wastewater facilities planning, larger basin planning, and again, our area-wide planning work. And of course, we're addressing pollution sources, maintaining streams and lake uses with water quality standards, protecting groundwater, controlling hydrologic modifications like dams. And, you know, once CMAP came into existence, CMAP became that designated area-wide water quality management planning agency, taking over, you know, say, from NIPSI. The next slide. So what are we doing today? So through, again, most of our work, again, thanks to through US EPA with funding to the state, Illinois EPA, through various sections of the Clean Water Act, one of those being the 604B program, which is water quality management, the legislation that describes water quality management planning. We are developing kind of, you know, our strategy has always been to provide technical assistance. We provide technical assistance throughout the region for anybody, you know, entities, counties, municipalities, townships, individual homeowners associations, whoever that may be, who may be working on developing watershed-based plans, implementing recommendations of watershed-based plans. We provide a regional coordination role, and, you know, can participate, you know, this is rather broad, can participate in all sorts of water quality improvement activities. As part of the work, again, these water quality management plan, quote unquote, consistency reviews. So, you know, historically, CMAP has the wastewater committee. We would review facility plans and facility planning area amendments, which might include wastewater treatment areas and plant upgrades, plant development, plant upgrades. That has changed a bit. Illinois EPA has kind of determined that those reviews are kind of covered through the NPDES permitting process. So while EPA were not required to do those reviews, we will still do them if requested to do so by, say, a municipality or a wastewater district. And that kind of leads into this designated management agency guidance review. We'll be kind of sitting down and kind of reviewing what is our role in this work. How can we best assist Illinois EPA in meeting their water quality goals, as well as meeting the region's water quality protection and aquatic habitat goals. So we're going to start this process of looking internally, as well as working with Illinois EPA. Again, that document wasn't officially, the statewide document hasn't been updated since 1982. So Illinois EPA will be kind of leading that, and we'll be collaborating with them as well as the other regional planning agencies to review and develop an update strategy framework in this within the next, about next year, year and a half. And then after that, start actually updating the statewide water quality plan. So I think that, you know, again, one of the big things we do as well is watershed-based planning. And that, again, as part of our area-wide role. I think the next slide shows, well, as I always like to do, while this group probably is quite familiar with what is a watershed and why do we care, why are they important, always like to start when I talk about watersheds with what it is, so we're all in the same boat, so to speak. So again, a watershed.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Holly, but just in the interest of time, I think we might want to try to move to the discussion in the next couple of minutes. Thanks.
Okay, so watersheds are important because we all live in a watershed and all our human activities impact that. And so the decisions we make, again, at that local level as people, that's where the rubber hits the road, right? So much of our region is painted with watershed plans. We are actually in the process of updating this map, so we'll be updated soon. The goal is to, quote unquote, kind of paint our region with watershed-based plans, because really the carrot at the end of the road there is recommendations therein are eligible for federal Clean Water Act funds, especially Section 319, which is the non-point source pollution control program. So to help make things happen. I think the next slide just shows we have, again, our involvement we've developed, facilitated and developed many plans around the region. We have administered grants for others, oversaw other groups, other partners developing these plans, and we can sit on advisory committees or provide a review and input role. So I think that pretty much, nutshell.
Yeah. Thanks, Holly. So we have a set of discussion questions here, but happy to answer any questions or respond to any comments that you may have.
Nora, there were a couple of questions that came in the chat. One, I think you addressed, was looking for a link to the municipal forecasts. So that link is in there now. And then Edith had a question on the definition of water use capture versus absolute use.
Yeah, so originally the state had a doctrine of absolute use to water. So if you own a piece of property, you could use whatever water was underneath it, regardless of how it impacted your neighbors. In 1983, the Water Use Act changed it to one of reasonable use, which still gives you a lot of latitude on how you use the water, but it places some restrictions of that it can't be wasteful, it can't be malicious. And so it's just a slight change that's important for mediating conflicts. Aaron.
Thanks for those presentations. And I suppose given the title of this committee, although of course water fits under the purview, can you just speak a little bit to how future climate forecasts and the impacts of climate change are incorporated in either the quantity or quality discussions?
Sure, I'll tackle the water supply one first. In our update of the regional water demand forecast, our regular maintenance, we're seeking to update the next time around, and we want to include some climate scenarios to better understand how weather patterns are impacting current water use, and then start to look at what those climate projections could mean for water use in the future. So that's a primary way where we're interested in just understanding how demand could shift based on climate change. Another thing that CMAP explored in greater detail in Go-To 2040, if you can remember back to that plan. But we really looked at the water and energy nexus. We know that the distribution of water itself takes a lot of energy. And so we want to explore that in the future of just how does water conservation and efficiency also help us with our mitigation goals, right? Because we can reduce the amount of water that we're using and reduce the energy associated with it. And Holly, I don't know if you wanted to weigh in on the quality side.
Sure. Yes. On the quality side, I mean, I think it again ties into our stormwater management activities. It ties into our looking at regional flooding or just climate impacts, where if you're having more intense rainfall periods, more drought periods, again, there's an impact certainly on aquatic habitat, impact on runoff and carrying pollutants to our water bodies. So, we're starting to, I think, there's an opportunity to incorporate more of these thought processes and considerations, certainly into our watershed-based plans, and looking to, again, those collaborative processes. And when there's several municipalities and counties within a watershed, as we do this planning to incorporate some of these things, as well as incorporating that into comprehensive planning and other local plans. So it's kind of getting this mindset, all these mindsets into local thought, processes and thought making as we develop our region, redevelop our region. And so we're for all these sustainable activities.
Paul, did you have a comment? Question?
Yeah, first I just wanted to echo Edith's comments and thank you for the work you've done. As I mentioned, I think there's a vacuum, and there has been a vacuum for quite some time on the water sector in the metro area. And so is one that CMAP has done a nice job of attempting to fill, and I would encourage you to continue to pursue that. As far as just some thoughts about continuing work, as you mentioned, the Northwest Water Planning Alliance is done excellent work out west. And it's interesting to look at your graph showing potential decrease in Lake Michigan water usage. That's such a unique situation that impacts us in a way that underpins really the way our region functions as a whole, and is one of the likely one of the best tools available to help the western area in the Northwest Water Planning Alliance. But I also would suggest that there needs to be some long-term thought to positioning our region so that when technology advances to the point that there is the ability to have reuse, that maybe we could partially close that loop and put a full churn into making that water available. That makes more water available for the further west suburbs, but it also allows us to function more efficiently. And I think the same way we think about emissions reduction, we're doing it incrementally because it's the right thing to do, and sure, it helps us, but it really helps the whole world. And I think when we think about water resources and we look at what's going on in the American Southwest and other areas of the country that are misusing or really just maybe not placed in an appropriate location for water use, we can look at the Lake Michigan diversion as a resource to allow an environment where they could relocate to an environment that's more suitable for those types of uses. And so I think we've missed that as a region over the last many decades. And I'd like to have some thought put into how the fragmentization of the water sector, especially Lake Michigan diversion, which is managed by the DNR, but really is controlled by the city of Chicago and other municipalities that have lake access. And the fragmentization of the three water components, drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater, can be tied together in a more effective means. And I think that while those are very, very challenging, complex things to consider, CMAP is best suited to address those.
Thank you, Paul. Our On to 2050 plan did call for more integrated resource management, right? Of thinking all of these things together. And it is definitely complex. Looking forward to working with you more on that.
Likewise.
Cynthia?
Oh, thanks. A couple of issues, wondering if they are part of your scope of work in watershed health, and that is dam removal and also region-wide sensible salting.
I can respond to the first one. Sensible salting is definitely an important issue that the Northwest Water Planning Alliance has been a part of. They've been working with the conservation. Now I'm always going to goof it up, Cynthia. Is it the foundation or the fund?
The Conservation Foundation.
Thank you, Holly. And they are issuing some guidance on sort of the next frontier of sensible salting to owners of large parking lots and sidewalks, and try to reduce the amount of chlorides that are entering our shallow groundwater system through that effort. And we know that the county departments of transportation have advanced more sustainable salting in the future. And so we definitely see efforts on there. And Holly, you probably have a lot more to say about chlorides and dam removal than I do.
Yeah, I think all the watershed-based plans, look at the opportunities for dam removal. Certainly in the Fox River watershed right now, the Army Corps of Engineers is renewing their study of Fox River watershed dams. But then when we look up into the tributaries as well, is when you get to some of these watershed-based plans, dam removal is always a part of that in terms of both habitat health, as and also looking at road crossings, in terms of aquatic life movement, as well as flooding impacts that older styles of road crossings have that sometimes act as dams. So yes, that's always included. Again, the sensible salting, you certainly see in the DuPage River Salt Creek Work Group, all the work they've done to kind of survey all their communities, find out how the practices that all of their public works are using, and a great effort on education, again, with the Conservation Foundation. reducing, being more efficient in salt use, as well as the tollway. The tollway is doing some new things, developing. They're also trying to do more cutting edge work on our tollway system as well. So yes, always those are considerations brought in.
So I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump in here real quickly, given time. Reed, if you have, I know Reed, you had your hand up. If you have a quick comment, could you share it? I'm sorry, I'm going to have to wrap this section up.
Sure, quick comment. If you're going to look at the effects of possible offshore wind turbines succeeding on Lake Michigan and the effects of the water quality and biodiversity and all animal life there. I know Ohio had some issues and 10 years of lawsuits, and I didn't know if CMAP is looking at that proposal recently by US Rep, I think, to put turbines into the south side on Lake Michigan. Thanks.
Thanks, Reed. I'm aware of it, but we have not yet analyzed anything related to that.
Okay. Thank you, Nora and Holly. We really appreciate your presentation. And I am wondering, and maybe this is a question to consider, these are great questions, the prompts that you have here on this slide. If there might be another way for the committee to give you feedback on these questions, there's a lot that you're working on both sides. And so potentially, as we've done in some other meetings, have sort of a follow-up request for additional feedback if that might be something we pursue.
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay, so I'm going to move us along. We unfortunately are probably not going to have meaningful time for the next agenda item, which is the review or update on the strategic direction. I think Alex might have like a 1 sentence or 2 sentence update for us.
Thank you, Chair Dunbar. Yes, I'm happy to just provide a 1-sentence update and propose that I give a more substantive update on the strategic direction along with proposed 2023 work plan for the committee at the January meeting. I just wanted to let the committee know that we really appreciated your feedback over the spring and summer with the strategic direction, climate goals, and we've been incorporating that feedback into our work. We have a series of 10 workshops with CMAP staff. We've put a lot of work into really updating and refining the strategic direction, and look forward to sharing those updates with you in January. The full draft of the strategic direction is currently under executive review, and we hope to have that completed by the end of this year. So I'm going to keep it super short and end there. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex, and apologies for our time management. Look forward to hearing more about that in January. So there were a couple, we're moving on to agenda item committee member updates, and 2 committee members provided updates. One was Deborah Stone around the electric vehicle charging station project in charging station deserts. A very quick update, Deb, well, in the last few minutes.
I put a link in the chat. Learn more about our project in suburban Cook County and go on the site to nominate a site for electric vehicle charging stations and share the link with your networks and community members who might want to nominate sites. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. And then member Edith Macra has some news on the Mayor's Caucus Carbon Disclosure Project score and other recent awards. Edith?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I know everybody wants to wrap up. Our climate action plan for the region, which was completed last summer, we've been reporting through the Carbon Disclosure Project, the CDP, which was linked to the project that we worked on through the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. First year doing it was a little rough. Second year, I was just so proud that we got a score back of A- for the region. There's 1,200 cities and regions and states that are disclosing globally. We got an A-. The global average is a D, and our regional average is a C. So I'm just so proud of that, and I really want to thank CMAP because we relied on their data for so much of the reporting, and it just shows the alignment of the climate action plan that we have with the sort of the Global Covenant of Mayors standards. And then just real quickly, just in September, we won 2 statewide awards for the climate action plan, one from the state chapter of the American Planning Association and one from the state chapter American Society of Landscape Architects. And then this is totally bragging, but previous to that, we had 2 national awards, one from the Climate Registry called the Climate Leadership Award, and then one from the national chapter of the American Planning Association. So thanks for the opportunity to brag. And thanks to CMAP for helping so much with the reporting.
Thank you, Edith. And I see some others have been putting some other updates into the chat. So if you haven't stopped to read through the comments in the chat, for one, those will be captured in the minutes. But of course, if you have time, please look through those. Thanks, Thomas, for that most recent comment you just added. We're going to move on to other business. Is there any other business that is new business to come before the committee? Hearing none, we'll move on to the next item. And I believe the next item is public comment, which we've had lots of robust comment in the chat. I don't know, Brian, if you'd like to sort of after read it into the recording, or if it'll simply be sort of pasted into the minutes. Brian, what would you like to do?
Sure. In light of the time, I think we won't read every comment into the record, but we will include them verbatim in the minutes. I would encourage anyone to go back and look at the chat. It included several comments on transportation mitigation and regionally significant projects, as well as links to resources related to environmental justice, thoughts on work plan items for the committee next year, and we will make sure to capture all these and post them.
Thank you so much. And I know some folks are signing off for their next meetings. So I will just say, as we wrap up, our next meeting is scheduled for January 24th, 2023 at 9 a.m. And if there's no other business to come before the committee, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much. Appreciate all your contributions.
Thank you, everyone.